you believe peace is signed with ink alone, you have never watched a soldier throw himself into fire to protect someone he once married for politics. And before we begin, if stories about humanity's strength, sacrifice, and impossible love move you, make sure you subscribe to Coming the HFY, because this is where legends of our species are told without apology. The plaza of Hian Reach had been built as a symbol of unity, a smooth expanse of pale stone meant to commemorate the formal alliance between Earth and the Velian sovereignty. But when the first orbital lance split the sky open, that symbol shattered in a single heartbeat. High Princess Serilith Virll barely registered the scream of tearing atmosphere before a powerful arm slammed around her waist and drove her to the ground. And then there was only darkness beneath the armored body of Admiral Nathan Cade, his weight crushing and protective all at once as the shockwave rolled over them in blistering heat. He did not hesitate. He did not calculate optics. He simply covered her completely, his back toward the fire as debris rained down like judgment. In that suffocating space beneath him, hearing the wild, uneven hammer of a human heart through layers of composite plating, Serilith understood something the political analysts had failed to include in their projections. The man she had married to end a war was prepared to die on her soil without a second thought. Months earlier, their wedding aboard the neutral station Meridian Spire had been a ceremony of necessity rather than affection. Two figures in ceremonial armor reciting vows drafted by diplomats while fleets hovered on standby beyond the viewport. They had been strangers representing exhausted civilizations. Their union, a living treaty meant to prevent another decade of bloodshed. When they relocated to the Joint Command Vessel Horizon Accord, the divide between them felt wider than any battlefield. Her quarters maintained the dense gravity and cool bioluminescent lighting of Varelia, while his side radiated Earth-standard warmth and the faint scent of roasted spices. The corridor between them, a neutral zone, navigated with polite restraint. They spoke with formality at first, addressing each other by title, sharing meals like negotiators rather than spouses. But time has a way of eroding even the most carefully maintained distance. Nathan showed her how to tolerate tan chili paste without watering eyes, laughing softly when she demanded water in clipped royal irritation. She taught him the layered strategy game of Tales, where pieces evolved mid-match and victory required anticipating not just moves, but motives. Their fingers brushed more often than necessary across the board, and each accidental touch lingered longer than protocol required. She began to notice the subtle shifts in his posture when he relaxed, the rare unguarded smile that softened the hard lines carved by years of command, and he learned to read the faint shimmer of her skin patterns that betrayed emotions her species rarely voiced aloud. Then came Hian Reach, a recovering colony meant to symbolize renewal, its skyline still under construction, when the rogue Caric Dominion Splinter Fleet tore through orbit without warning. The Sirens had not even completed their first cycle before kinetic bombardment began, and the diplomatic tour dissolved into chaos. Nathan transformed in an instant. The man who had patiently learned alien board games became a battlefield commander forged in Earth's darkest campaigns. His voice snapped across open channels with lethal clarity as he seized control of planetary defenses whose officers were too stunned to respond. He assigned sniper nests, redirected anti-air batteries, and personally escorted Serilith toward evacuation tunnels. Even as explosions fractured the plaza behind them, he did not ask her to hide. He told her she was needed below, that her voice would steady the civilians flooding toward bunkers carved deep into the bedrock. When his gloved hands squeezed hers before he turned back toward the smoke, something unspoken passed between them that felt far more binding than any vow spoken months before. For 47 hours, the surface became a maze of fire and shattered stone, while she remained underground, coordinating evacuation lines and listening to fragmented reports of his movements. He led small strike teams through half-collapsed transit corridors, sabotaged enemy walkers with shaped charges placed at structural weak points, and refused medical extraction after taking shrapnel to the shoulder. The Caric soldiers were larger, bred for intimidation, but they were not prepared for the relentless adaptability of a Terran commander who treated urban ruin like a familiar landscape. He never held a position longer than necessary, striking supply depots and vanishing before reinforcements could respond. Through static-filled transmissions, she heard his breathing grow rougher, heard the strain in his voice as casualties mounted, and she found herself whispering quiet Velian prayers. Not for the Alliance, not for political stability, but for one stubborn human who refused to fall. When Terran reinforcements finally breached atmosphere in streaks of controlled fury, their entry rattled even the subterranean shelters, and the tide shifted with brutal efficiency. The Splinter Fleet fractured under coordinated assault, but their warlord, General Raz, retreated with a core unit into an abandoned fusion extraction tower at the colony's edge. transforming it into a final stronghold. Standard procedure demanded siege tactics and heavy bombardment. Yet Nathan made a different calculation. With civilian infrastructure at risk and diplomatic consequences looming, he organized a precision assault to isolate the tower while personally advancing with a 5-member distraction team to draw Razek into open confrontation. Serilith argued over comms, her royal composure cracking as she demanded he delegate, but he only replied that some battles required visible resolve, and if the galaxy was watching, it needed to see that humanity did not hide behind fleets when lives were at stake. Razek emerged in armor layered like overlapping blades, towering and brutal, his voice booming challenges across the debris-littered yard. To the astonishment of both armies, Nathan discarded his rifle, signaling single combat. The clash was savage and intimate, metal shrieking against metal, blades flashing in arcs that reflected burning structures. Razak relied on raw strength, each strike capable of shattering bone, but Nathan moved with terrifying precision, targeting joints, exploiting moments of overextension, turning the general's mass against him. Over open palms, Serilith heard every impact, every labored breath. Her hands clenched so tightly around the receiver that her palms bled faint iridescent light. When Nathan finally drove Razak to one knee, blade poised at the exposed seam of his neck plating, silence fell across the battlefield. He could have ended it. Instead, he withdrew the blade and ordered the general taken into custody, declaring that this war would conclude with trial rather than execution. It was a gamble that stunned even his own officers, but it fractured the remaining resistance more effectively than annihilation would have. In choosing mercy before a watching galaxy, he transformed a tactical victory into a moral one. The medical bay afterward was quiet except for the low hum of regeneration fields. Serilith sat beside his recovery cradle, watching human physicians work with calm urgency. When his eyes finally opened days later, the formal distance that had once defined them was gone. He reached for her without ceremony, fingers rough and trembling, and she pressed her luminous forehead to his, their breaths mingling in a gesture far more intimate than their wedding had been. The alliance they represented no longer felt like a contract drafted by others. It was something chosen, something fiercely personal. In the years that followed, the trial of Razek became a turning point in interstellar law. At a grand convocation on Earth, Serilith stood proudly as the Velian High Council awarded Nathan the Star of Concord for valor tempered by restraint. 5 years later, Hian Reach had transformed from scarred battleground to thriving metropolis. Its skyline completed, its plazas filled with markets and music instead of smoke. On the terrace of their shared home overlooking the rebuilt city, Serilith watched Nathan kneeling in the grass. His decorated uniform traded for simple clothes as he laughed with a small child whose skin shimmered faintly with Velian light and whose eyes carried unmistakable human warmth. Their daughter balanced between worlds as easily as she balanced on her father's knee, tiny hands gripping his collar as he pretended to surrender to her giggling assault. Nathan looked up and caught Serilith's gaze, and the smile he gave her held none of the guarded diplomacy of their early days, only quiet gratitude and fierce devotion. The soldier who once married for peace had become something more than a symbol. He was proof that humanity's greatest strength was not just its capacity for war, but its stubborn insistence on protecting what it loves, even when that love begins as duty. As evening settled over Hian Reach, lights blooming across the horizon like new constellations, Serilith understood that the alliance had survived not because it was politically necessary, but because one human had chosen again and again to stand between destruction and the future, and in doing so had built a family that neither empire could have predicted, yet both now depended upon. Please follow my channel for more videos. One click from you can change my life.